and welcome to another episode in my Learning Lightroom series of videos. Today I want to delve a little bit into the Develop module and look at the History and Snapshots panels. So let's start with the History. Now this panel holds a record of everything that's been done to your image. So if I open it up, you can see it's a record of all the adjustments since you first imported the image into Lightroom. Now the only entry in this so far is import, because that's all I've done to the image. I've just imported it. Now let's do a bit of workflow on it. I fancy a bit of a square composition, so I'm going to go into the crop tool. I'm going to make sure that this padlock's unticked so it won't constrain my proportions, and then I'm going to drag it back and then put it in the center and then double click to accept that. That's okay. Now what can I do next? Well, what I think it looked like in black and white. Okay, so we'll just go over to the B&W, give it a click, and we've turned it to black and white. Now what about a sepia tone? Okay, so I'll go down a split toning and I'll put a little bit of a browny yellowy colour in the highlights, and I'll put something very similar in the shadows till I get a little bit of a sepia tone look like that, and I'll move the balance a little bit. Yeah, that's not bad. Now let's finish it off with a little bit of a vignette. So I'll go down to my effects panel, I'll just darken it up just round the outsides, and I think we'll leave it about there. Okay, now if you've been keeping an eye open on this left hand side here, you'll see things have been happening. You'll see that everything I've done has been recorded, all these different states of what I've been doing to the image. I've converted to black and white, I've put a sepia tone, and then I've put a vignette, post-crop vignette at the top. Now if I click on any of these states, it'll take me back to whatever that state in time was. So if I come back to the black and white, that's when I was at black and white. I can take it right back to import if I want. We'll go right up to the point where we are at the moment. So any one I click on takes me back to that particular point in time. So if I'm not happy with my image as it is, I can revisit each state in history to see if there's a place I was happy with or where I might want to get back to, and take the image off in another direction. So let's say, for example, I really don't like this sepia tone. Well, I can go right back to the convert to black and white state and click on that, and I can move on from there. Now I might want to deepen the shadows a bit and add a bit of clarity, so let's do that. Let's go here, we'll deepen the shadows a little bit, and let's add a little bit of clarity. There we go. Now you'll notice now that I'm adding new states to the history at the top of the black and white one. The sepia states have now disappeared altogether. Now it's a bit like having Doctor Who as your best mate. If you took you back in time in the TARDIS and you changed something in the past, then you end up creating a whole new future. Whew, getting a bit deep there, but I hope you get what I mean. Well, that's the history panel. What about snapshots? How do these work? Well, let's work a little bit more on this image. Let's say we want to experiment with a bit of a blue look. Okay, so let's go down to split toning, but this time we'll add a bit of a blue look to it in the highlights, and we'll do the same in the shadows. So we've now got a blue look. Ooh, what about a green look? Okay, well, let's move the slider to make it a little bit green. We'll try this one. So now I've got a green look. Now if you look, you can see that the history panel is starting to fill up, and the list is going to get very long. Now if I want to revisit my black and white state, say, it might not be too easy to find. Now this is where snapshots come in. If I can find the black and white history entry, so let's go down and find it, it's here, and if I right click on it, I can create snapshot. Now I'll leave that as name, convert to black and white, and I'll click create. And you'll see that it now appears in the snapshots panel as convert to black and white. Now let's make a couple more. Let's go to where the blue was, which, let me see if I can find that. And there, yeah, we are. That's where the blue was. So we'll try the hue as well. No, there we go. That's where the blue was. So if I right click, create snapshot, and we'll call it blue tones. And then we'll come up right to the top and we'll say, well, that's where we did the green. So I'm going to right click on that, create the snapshot, and we'll call that green tones. Okay, so now I've got 3 snapshots taken in the editing history of the file, and I can easily switch between them now without scrolling back through the history panel. I can go to my blue tones, back to my black and white, or I can go to my green tones. Now you can make them as you go along every time you reach a critical point in your workflow. So for example, let's make some red tones. So I'll go over to the reds, a bit of that in, and in the shadows as well. There we go. So now what I can do is create a snapshot. So I can go to the snapshots panel and click the plus icon. I'll call it red tones, and I'll click create. And there we go. We've now got the blue tones, convert to black and white, my green tones, or I can click quickly to get onto my red tones. So snapshots are just another way for you to be able to save different versions of your images. Well, last topic I want to cover is the reset button. Now let's say that you process your image and you get a little carried away. So you think you're going in a good direction, but then you find that you fell asleep, but your mouse hand kept going and took you to a place you didn't really want to go. So let's do that. Let's go back to the basic panel. We'll change the temperature slider, we'll change the exposure and the contrast, boost the highlights, put the shadows, bit of the whites, blacks, and we'll have a little bit of clarity as well, and let's try a bit of vibrance, and a bit of saturation as well. Right, so we've made a right pig's ear of this. So how can you reset your sliders, or in fact reset the image altogether? Well, first you can reset a slider by double clicking on the slider itself, and this will return it to its default value. So if I double click on the exposure slider, double click on the contrast slider, it'll take it back to its default value. If you want to reset a group of sliders, like for instance the tone sliders, if you hold down the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on a Mac, the word tone changes to reset tone, and if I click on that, it'll reset all the sliders in that bunch. And last but not least, we can also reset the entire image all the way back to its original state by clicking on the reset button. Well, that's it for this episode. How to use snapshots, history and reset. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel to make sure you catch all my future episodes. Bye for now.